Hey there, remember me, the one with the bunny tail? So, I suggested releasing the wild bunny into the bushes for a safer transition, but my wife opted for the middle of the yard. Well, a hawk swooped in and grabbed the poor creature right in front of our young kids. They jokingly dubbed her the Bunny Destroyer after that, a nickname that stuck when her affair came to light. But compared to what I'm about to share, that bunny incident feels like ancient history. I've recently finalized my divorce, and let me tell you, the journey since then has been quite the roller coaster. Brace yourselves for what's to come. So, I took the bold move of showing my wife my original post, and let's just say she was not happy. It triggered a heated argument that led to a week of silence from her end. I tried to get my kids to ease up on their mom after the bunny incident, even resorting to minor punishments like grounding and timeouts, but that darn Bunny Destroyer nickname just kept resurfacing whenever the kids got upset with her. Eventually, my wife eased up on the cold shoulder treatment, admitting that she should have heeded my advice about the bunny and taken it to the bushes like I suggested. She claimed she felt the need to defend herself because she didn't want to admit she was wrong. I accepted her apology and even apologized for posting our story. Things seemed to be improving, and I suggested marriage counseling. But she shot that down. She acted like everything was hunky-dory in our marriage, and I didn't want to push it any further since we appeared to be getting along better. But a few weeks later, my eldest came to me with something she wanted to share. She had another reason for being angry with her mom, aside from the bunny incident. She was scared to tell me at first, but I assured her she could confide in me. And let me tell you, what she revealed was shocking and turned everything upside down in an instant. My daughter finally mustered the courage to tell me something that had been bothering her for months. She revealed that Mama had been having a man over on Saturdays when I was at work, and she referred to him as her special friend. She managed to keep the kids quiet about it through various forms of bribery, but my eldest sensed that something was seriously off. Kids have a way of picking up on things pretty fast, and it's frustrating when people dismiss that. I had noticed a change in my wife's behavior lately. She had become more irritable, especially with the kids. When I wrote her my initial post and tried talking to her about it, she went off on me about every little thing she could think of. She insulted my appearance, my character, my habits, and even my side of the family. She even brought up the fact that I used to smoke, even though I quit over 10 years ago. Then she started locking me out of our bedroom and crying loudly enough for the entire house to hear. So when my eldest daughter approached me, I started connecting the dots. It seemed like she was cheating, and her behavior resembled the mood swings she had during her pregnancies, though this time it was even worse. While I'm no psychology expert, it made some sense, especially when considering what I found online and what friends and a counselor shared with me about mood swings, hormones, and projection due to infidelity. I desperately hoped it was all a misunderstanding. But I couldn't ignore the signs any longer. I decided to take action and ordered some hidden cameras, having them delivered to my workplace. To keep it a secret at home, I set them up on a day when my wife went out for a girls' night with her friends. The installation was a breeze, connecting them to the Wi-Fi. Within a few hours, I could monitor every inch of our house from my home PC, laptop, and work PC. Initially, I worried that I might have been going too far, but my worst fears were confirmed as I gathered plenty of evidence within just the first week. My wife's affair partner used to be her colleague, and I remember him well because they seemed quite close whenever I met him at different events. My wife left her job years ago to become a full-time mom after our first child was born. We made that decision together back then. She stayed in touch with her former coworkers, who were her best friends at the time, but not anymore. What I'm about to tell you has pretty much made everyone hate her. Firstly, this AP is younger than my wife by almost a decade. She mentored him at her old job to fill her position when she left, and they remained very close. Very close. My wife and I are both over 40, but you wouldn't guess that by looking at her. She's incredibly attractive and often mistaken for someone in their 20s. I guess she took advantage of that. I ended up confiding in my sister about what was happening and showed her the footage from the nanny cams. She told me she had suspected something for a while and mentioned seeing my wife once at a local bar getting a bit too cozy with a man who wasn't me. They didn't kiss while she was watching, but there was a lot of touching on the shoulders and lower back. Since she wasn't sure, she didn't tell me sooner. I decided to take things a step further and ordered a GPS tracker. After setting it up, I hid it in the trunk of my wife's car. My sister and her husband agreed to help me, and they followed the tracker on my wife's next supposed night out with friends. However, she went to a completely different place 20 miles farther away than her usual destination, where she met up with the AP. My sister and her husband observed them from their car for some time and noticed that the AP kept rubbing her belly while they were talking. They even recorded a video of this. When I saw the footage, I realized she must be pregnant with his baby, which explained her moodiness at home. I completely lost it, and I wanted to drown my sorrows in alcohol, but my sister wisely advised against it, knowing it was the worst thing I could do at that moment. Later, I decided to take some time off from work, but I told my wife it was for a business trip. She seemed thrilled about it and didn't even try to hide her excitement that I'd be gone for a while. Who is this woman, you know? She's nothing like the person I married nearly 20 years ago, right? Sometimes it feels like someone who looks just like her replaced her one day. Is she an alien from a sci-fi movie? Did I ever truly understand who she really is? The more I dwelled on it, the less it made sense to me. So I came to the conclusion that trying to make sense of everything wouldn't benefit me in any way. I had cameras all around the house, and my sister and her husband agreed to take care of my kids for a few days since they love visiting their aunt and uncle in the city. This gave my wife the perfect opportunity she wanted. Only a few hours after I left, she called her affair partner, and he came over that evening to spend the night. I won't delve into the explicit details of what they did around the house, you can fill in the blanks. But on top of everything, they were openly making jokes about me. They discussed their impending baby and how they needed to come up with a plan before her pregnancy became too obvious. She was already more than 3 months pregnant by then, and there was no way to pass the baby off as mine, especially since AP and I are of different races. It would be quite evident the child wasn't mine from birth. My wife dismissed AP's concerns, claiming they had plenty of time to figure it out. Then, shockingly, she admitted this wasn't her first affair. She had cheated on me when she was 29. She confessed to AP that she was tired of pretending to be a good housewife and being stuck with a boring man like me who made her feel old. She even mentioned that if it weren't for my financial stability, she would have left me long ago. When AP asked her about our kids, her response was heartless, he can have them. She didn't even want to be around our children anymore because she believed they favored me, and she was convinced that she would soon have her do-over baby, as she put it. I was so disgusted that I almost threw my laptop on the motel room floor, but I managed to control myself. I had a few beers from a six-pack, grabbed dinner at a local diner, and watched a movie. After that, I spent half the night lying in bed, lost in thought, until I finally drifted off to sleep. It was all so bewildering because I thought I had known my wife so well. I really loved her and would have given her everything I had. But sometimes, there are just some really awful people out there. You can never truly know someone until they show their true colors. That's when I decided I was going to make her pay in the divorce. Normally, I'm a kind and laid-back guy, but when pushed to my limit, I can turn into someone you'd never want to mess with. So, the very next day, I went to a law firm that specializes in divorce lawyers and asked for the toughest one they had. I live in a state where fault in a divorce can make a big difference, and my wife was in deep trouble once I had her affair on camera. The lawyer was a bit surprised at how quickly I wanted to hire him until I shared all the details and even showed him some video evidence. That's when he got a sinister grin, and we shook hands. He said he'd get started right away because this was the kind of case divorce lawyers thrive on. A few weeks later, I had my wife served with divorce papers while I was working from home and the kids were at school. Our eldest was in kindergarten, and the youngest was in preschool. The papers were handed directly to her by the local sheriff, and it was all captured on camera. She looked terrified when she opened the envelope, read the contents, and then completely lost her composure. She stormed into my office to give me an earful, but I remained calm throughout. I had already mentally checked out of our marriage. She wanted to argue, but I simply told her that my decision was final and I wanted her out of my house. After all, I was the only one who had been paying the mortgage. She threatened to spread lies about me, like saying I had offended her, to ruin my reputation and job. I just told her to go ahead and make up any story she wanted. It wouldn't help her, especially since she was pregnant with her affair partner's baby. She looked shocked and asked how much I knew. My response was simple, I knew enough. I reiterated that I watched her on the bedroom cameras having a meltdown and then calling the police on her phone. She was acting all panicked, but there was a sly smile on her face while doing it. She was quite the actress. I would have believed her act on the phone if I didn't already know she was a liar. So, I waited for the police with the front door wide open and welcomed them in when they arrived. Initially, they seemed pretty fired up and ready for some kind of showdown. However, when they checked the house, everything was clean, and there were no signs of a fight. Out of the blue, my wife rushed out of the bedroom, grabbed one of the officers by the vest, and started crying while accusing me of being a maniac. I asked another officer if I could show them the evidence to set the record straight, and he agreed. This completely caught my wife off guard because she had no idea that I had recorded her. I displayed the officer the footage from the security cameras on my laptop, showing my wife threatening to make up lies to destroy my life. Then I showed them the footage from the living room after she ran out of my office and into our bedroom down the hall. Finally, I presented them with footage from the bedroom camera of her calling the police and fabricating a story. I had recorded it all from multiple angles, no less. Despite her claims to the police that I had harmed her, there were no marks on her, and the cameras all around the house painted a completely different picture. I then handed the police a thumb drive containing all the video evidence they needed of her making false accusations to the authorities. Even in the face of overwhelming evidence, my wife stuck to her false story, suggesting that the recordings were illegal and therefore inadmissible. But I quickly pointed out that they were legal because they were recorded by security cameras inside my own home, not in a public space. My wife turned to the police and urged them to take action, which they did. She ended up in handcuffs, and she began crying like a child. It was hard for me to believe that this was the same woman I had loved for so many years. I used to think she was a wonderful, intelligent, and charming person. Turns out, I couldn't have been more wrong. As the police took her away, she screamed that they couldn't do this to her, but she didn't put up much of a fight to avoid adding resisting arrests to her charges. Afterward, I canceled all her credit cards that were in my name and halted any future payments into our joint bank account. This meant she had to use her own money to bail herself out of jail. Fortunately, she had saved plenty over the years while she was still working. Even though the mortgage was solely in my name, she came back to retrieve her car, which I had thoughtfully packed with some of her clothes and personal items, leaving the key on the seat. I made sure she couldn't re-enter the house. My wife's parents did pay me a visit a day after she bailed herself out of jail. Initially, they only knew the version of events she had shared with them, which was pretty much the same story she had tried to tell the police. Her father, in particular, seemed ready to confront me. Despite his age, he's a big and strong man. However, when I asked him if he had any knowledge about my wife's affair or her pregnancy, he looked quite surprised and gave me the opportunity to explain myself. I brought out the laptop again to show my in-laws the evidence I had recorded. When they learned the truth, they were disgusted and couldn't believe that this was their daughter. They offered their apologies to me and assured me they'd stay in touch to help out with my kids. They decided to call my wife on speaker right in front of me and confronted her about her lies. Initially, she tried to stick to her story until they mentioned that they were with me at that moment and had seen the recordings. They knew the whole truth and demanded that she leave their house immediately. She attempted to backtrack, but my in-laws made it clear that they hadn't raised her to be a selfish, adulterous person who would try to frame her own husband. They disowned her over the phone right then and there, hanging up before my wife could respond. She tried calling back, but they ignored her every attempt. When they returned home, not only had she disappeared, but she had also caused damage to several things around their house, leaving my mother-in-law in tears. I still consider my ex's parents as my in-laws because they continued to visit their grandchildren from time to time. However, my ex is effectively estranged from all of us. Later, my wife returned with her affair partner in tow to collect her belongings. The affair partner didn't even set foot inside the house, and my wife refused to utter a word to me while packing her remaining items. She was well aware that there were security cameras everywhere and any misstep would only incriminate her further. I wasn't alone. My sister and brother-in-law were there to help keep an eye on her. My brother-in-law made sure to watch over the affair partner from a window. My wife was still in the process of packing when the kids arrived home. She didn't make any effort to speak to either of them, not even when our youngest child cried for her. Before leaving, she did take a few photos of us from our wedding off the wall and threw them on the floor, shattering them. I believe she expected some reaction from me, judging by the way she looked at me while doing it. However, I chose not to say anything. So she just grabbed her remaining bags and walked out the door. After her departure, I had to call my elderly mother to come stay with me for a while because I couldn't manage the kids on my own. Taking time off work was challenging, and childcare options were limited. I also decided to order DNA tests for my kids just to be sure, even though I was confident they were mine. Fortunately, the tests confirmed that both of my children are indeed mine. Additionally, I took precautions and got tested for STIs, and I'm clean, so no need to worry on that front. Around a week later, my wife unexpectedly showed up at my doorstep, suggesting that she'd be willing to agree to an amicable divorce. In essence, she wanted to split everything down the middle if I consented. I, however, declined her offer right to her face. We had some back-and-forth arguments, and she more or less conceded that the state's laws were not in her favor. We had met, got engaged, married, and lived our entire lives in this state, so she couldn't escape taking a significant loss unless I agreed to a settlement, which I firmly refused. I reminded her that she had betrayed not only me but also our kids, her parents, and practically everyone by having an affair. I then firmly closed the door on her. She left without much of a fuss, and I didn't see her again until the court proceedings several months later. During the divorce court hearing, my wife was visibly pregnant, and she had obtained legal representation. Her affair partner was nowhere to be seen. I expected her to lie to the judge, which she attempted a few times. However, I had ample video evidence to counter any falsehoods, so she didn't stand much of a chance with that approach. Instead, she tried to prolong the divorce by refusing to cooperate and making a slew of demands. For starters, she wanted a significant portion of my savings and a long list of other items I owned. She even insisted that I buy her out of her share of the house, despite her never contributing to the mortgage. On my part, I was pushing for full custody of the kids and to remove her name from the house deed. I had video evidence supporting her statements about not caring for our children anymore and her willingness to make up lies. My wife attempted to delay the proceedings and frequently changed her demands, but the judge didn't allow her to keep dragging things out. In our fault state, my wife's entitlement was minimal due to her being the adulterer, and her attempt to frame me only worsened her case. Ultimately, she lost all custody of our kids and left with just her belongings, a reasonable financial settlement given the circumstances, and the car I had bought for her. Even though the car's title was in my name, I didn't hesitate to sign it over as part of the settlement. During the entire divorce, she didn't make any effort to communicate with our children, so I gained full custody, and the house is now entirely mine, giving me complete freedom from her. My ex-wife did make an effort to maintain her lies about me to others, both before and during the divorce. However, my sisters spread the word about my wife's infidelity, and once our mutual friends realized who was telling the truth, they cut ties with her. After the divorce, she and her affair partner left town together. I heard that her AP wasn't fired but was transferred, where, I'm not sure. But what I do know is that my ex had to go with him. Their destination could have been the frozen wastelands of Greenland for all I cared. I'm just relieved that they're both gone by now. My ex should have had her do-over baby, and I hope it was worth it for her. This isn't what I expected to share after talking about my wife releasing a bunny where a hawk could snatch it. Many of the comments I received previously about her behavior made me realize that I should have paid attention to the warning signs long ago, I suppose. I kept my rose-colored glasses on throughout our entire marriage. I managed to remove my ex's name from the house deed because all the bank records clearly showed that I was the only one contributing to it financially. My ex didn't make it easy with her repeated arguments in court. In our at-fault state, being a confirmed cheater can lead to major trouble during a divorce, almost like having a signed prenuptial agreement against you. When I mentioned getting the meanest lawyer in town, I wasn't kidding. This guy was a combination of a bear and a shark. As part of the settlement, my wife received $60,000, and I also gave her the car I had bought brand new for her a couple of years back, which cost me $50,000. The car was fully paid off, and I transferred the title to her. Initially, my ex was offered partial custody of our children, but after the video of her saying she didn't care about them anymore surfaced, she decided not to pursue any custody. In fact, she willingly gave up all her rights to our kids when she realized she couldn't have things her way. And for those who might doubt that the police would arrest my ex for lying, think again. The police in our area take these matters very seriously. My ex, with a sociopathic grin on her face, attempted to frame me as an offensive husband. That was more than enough grounds for her arrest. Story 2, I'm a 43-year-old guy, and I've been married to my wife, Jilly, who's 39, for a whopping 17 years. It feels kind of strange to start talking about my marriage now, considering how long we've been together. Like any other relationship, our marriage has had its fair share of ups and downs. For the first 10 to 11 years, things were pretty smooth sailing, but then about 6 years ago, we hit a major rough patch. The trouble began when my warehouse caught fire, and even though insurance covered our losses, it took me years to recover from the setback. Just before this disaster, we had purchased a new house with a mortgage. However, we had to sell that house and move back to our old one to make ends meet. I had to sell my car, which was a tough decision for me. Jilly didn't want to part with her car, so I had to sacrifice mine. I used her car when I needed it. During this difficult period, our marriage hit rock bottom. Jilly wasn't willing to compromise on her lifestyle. We had been living quite comfortably before the crisis hit, and suddenly everything changed for the worse. It wasn't just her, we were all facing difficulties, but she acted as if she was the only one suffering. She refused to cut back on her luxuries, whether it was her car, shopping spree, or regular spa visits and maintenance sessions. I had to take on multiple responsibilities during this time. Not only did I have to rebuild the business from scratch, but I also had to ensure we had food on the table and cover the kids' school expenses. Instead of being understanding and supportive, Jilly acted like a winner. Her attitude really frustrated me. She became resentful, and I started distancing myself from her. She'd manipulate the situation, playing the victim, without trying to understand why I had become distant. She'd also badmouth me to her family, who would then come to me, not necessarily meddling in our affairs but making their presence felt. Jill has always been very close to her family, which is extensive and well-connected. Jill's parents live just down the street, and 2 of her siblings also live nearby. Jilly had this annoying habit of dragging her parents and siblings into our personal matters, which used to drive me crazy. It's not like they were mean or unfair to me, but I just didn't like them getting involved in our stuff. Whenever I tried to keep my problems to myself, she'd hit me with their family, saying that family shares their problems. Sure, they did help me out from time to time, but it also made me feel kind of inadequate. Anyway, I somehow managed to get my business back on its feet. It took me a good 5 or 6 years, but I finally got back on track. With my business finally picking up, I thought our personal life would follow suit. We started going on vacations again, spent weekends hiking, and enjoyed dinners and lunches out. My kids, who had also been worried about our finances, were slowly recovering from our frugal lifestyle. However, Jilly remained distant. Last month was our anniversary, and I planned a surprise celebration, just like the good old days, thinking it would reignite our lost spark. She seemed thrilled with all the gifts, and our love life did spark up for a short while. But after a week, it went back to square one. She was still the same, and that's when I realized it had to be more than just financial issues causing our relationship to crumble. Up until then, I'd been blaming our money problems for our failing marriage. But now that those were sorted, the next obvious reason that crossed my mind was an affair. So I decided to do some digging. I attempted to check her phone, but it was password protected and I couldn't crack it. I started paying closer attention to her daily routine. For all those years, I had been oblivious to the red flags. Or maybe when you're working 14 to 16 hours a day, suspecting your wife is the last thing on your mind. Now that I have had more free time, I began spending more time with my sons. During one of our conversations, I found out that Jill was heading out every other afternoon, sometimes even daily. I asked my kids if they knew where she was going, but they had no clue. She never told them. So, I decided to buy a tracking device and discreetly installed it in her car. The very next day, she headed out in the afternoon, and I decided to follow her. She drove nearly 20 miles away and pulled into a hotel. I parked my car a few buildings away and strolled over to the hotel, trying to avoid being seen by either her or her friend. But when I got there, she had disappeared. I couldn't spot her anywhere, so I went inside and snagged a table at the hotel cafe. I waited around for about an hour, hoping to catch a glimpse of someone I knew, but no familiar faces showed up. Eventually, I decided to leave. As I was halfway back, a thought crossed my mind: I should go back and wait for them to leave. I quickly made a U-turn and returned to the hotel. This time I parked my car and kept watch from inside. After about an hour, she finally came out, and that's when I got a look at her affair partner. I didn't recognize the guy. He might have been someone she met outside our usual social circle. I took photos and videos of them hugging and kissing near the exit, but I didn't want to confront her just yet. She could come up with any excuse to explain it away, and I didn't want to risk blowing my chance. Yes, I wanted something more concrete, like their messages or more videos of their actions. So, I started searching for ways to gather more evidence, and that's how I ended up here on this subreddit. If anyone has been through something similar or has any ideas on how to proceed, I'd really appreciate your input. Thanks a lot. Regarding your question, well, you're right that the photos and videos seem like solid evidence of an affair. However, having more concrete proof like messages or additional videos could make your case even stronger in the long run. One of the most common suggestions I received from people was to hire a private investigator. I had conversations with a few agencies to learn about their process and charges, but none of it sounded appealing. So, I decided to take matters into my own hands first. If I didn't make any headway, I'd consider hiring a PI. One day while Jill was occupied in the kitchen, I discreetly placed my phone in a closet and asked her for her phone, pretending I needed to make a call from my number. She unlocked her phone and handed it to me without any suspicion. In just a matter of minutes, I downloaded a hidden clone app onto her phone. My goal was to access her phone data remotely. My first move was to check her chat history. I exported all her chat conversations and gathered information about her affair partner. I even found his email address in her inbox. I came across pictures and videos in her gallery too. I was in a hurry because I wasn't sure how the app would work, and I worried about her receiving any notifications related to the cloning process. So, I aimed to collect as much information as possible. After successfully obtaining all this data from her phone, I went to my warehouse to closely examine and review it. The chat history went back 6 months, but it appeared that they had been seeing each other for much longer. They were deeply involved, expressing love for each other and engaging in explicit conversations about their respective partners. It was evident that they had no plans to get married or divorce their spouses, they were simply enjoying their time together while criticizing their partners. Although they exchanged explicit photos, there were no videos of them together. I found out more about her affair partner's background through his social media accounts. His wife holds a demanding professional job, working long hours each day, while he, a baseball coach at a school, has free time in the afternoons, which he apparently spends with other men's wives. Now that I have enough evidence to potentially expose his extramarital affair, I plan to contact his wife. However, before taking any further steps, I want to expose the person living in my house. I don't want her to escape with her dignity intact. I want to humiliate her and make her feel the way she made me feel during my financial crisis. The challenge now is figuring out how to do that. Seeking professional and legal advice might be the best course of action before proceeding. I mean, you already have substantial evidence to pursue legal action against her, perhaps you don't even need a PI at this point. It seems like you're just going over old ground. In my last update, I talked about collecting evidence by cloning her phone onto mine. I was concerned about the app's functionality and the risk of getting caught, but it remained discreet and hidden for 2 weeks before I deactivated it. By that time, I had gathered enough evidence to make my case. It was utterly revolting to see their live chats. She used to engage in explicit conversations with him right in front of our kids and me. She would describe what she was wearing and how she was positioned on the couch, expressing her longing for him. My children were right next to her when she said things like, "I wish you were here with me." It was beyond disturbing, and I don't know how I managed to keep my composure in those situations. Imagine this, you're lying next to your wife, and she's texting her lover, openly discussing how she desires his touch at that very moment. Sometimes she would even touch my back while sharing these explicit desires. There were moments when I wanted to strangle her in her sleep. When I retrieved the data from her phone, I found only a few photos that they had shared, mostly selfies and pictures of new outfits. I initially thought they weren't sharing explicit content, but I was wrong. They were sharing explicit photos, but she promptly deleted them so they didn't get backed up. However, since I was tracking everything in real time, I managed to capture it all. They not only exchanged explicit pictures but also short videos of themselves engaging in intimate activities. While all this evidence was accumulating, I devised a plan to expose her to her family and friends. I sent an email to all her close family members, including her parents, siblings, godmother, aunts, uncles, and some of her best friends. I invited them to a surprise party but didn't reveal the reason, simply stating we're expecting happy news. I made it clear not to tell Jilly or the children about it. I had successfully pulled off a surprise anniversary celebration a few months ago, so I was confident about this one too. This time, however, I needed to ensure that the children were kept out of the confrontation. Regardless of how much I despised Jilly, I can't let her children witness her in that manner. The recipients of my invitation speculated that I had bought a new house, as it wasn't our anniversary or anyone's birthday. They might have even thought we were expecting a baby, but that wouldn't have been a surprise to Jilly. I suggested they come together to make this surprise impactful, and I asked Jill's sister to bring champagne and cake. She readily agreed to help. On the expected evening, just before her family and friends arrived, I arranged for my kids to have a sleepover at their friends' houses. This would ensure they were away from the upcoming confrontation. Meanwhile, Jilly was preoccupied communicating with her lover, indulging in her desires. When her parents, siblings, and guests arrived with champagne and cake, Jilly became curious and questioned me about what was happening. I informed her that I had some news to share. She promptly updated her lover about the situation, explaining that she would be away for a few hours and would continue their intimate conversations once she finished dealing with my news. She sent him plenty of affectionate emojis and archived all their chats, cleverly turning off notifications afterward. She suddenly became affectionate and loving towards me, showering me with hugs and praises. She, like everyone else, assumed that the news I had to share was about our new house or something similar. She couldn't stop expressing how fortunate she felt to have me as her husband. I just smiled patiently, waiting for the others to arrive. When the time was right, I asked Jilly to sit with me at the center of the room. She held my hand with excitement, not suspecting what was about to unfold. The projector was set up in the living room, and the first slideshow began with a shocking image of her locked in a passionate kiss with her affair partner. Before anyone could react, the slideshow swiftly transitioned to explicit chats between them, with enlarged fonts displaying the intimate conversations and the explicit photos they had exchanged. I could sense the nervousness in Jilly as she pleaded with me to stop the slideshow. The presentation was running automatically, and it was becoming uncomfortable for everyone in the room. Her siblings suggested that we discuss our private matters separately, but I immediately objected, questioning why we should do that when all my issues had been laid bare in front of them. I reminded them of the time when I asked Jilly to sell her car, and she called them over, and they convinced me to sell mine instead. I had to rely on public transportation or beg for her car in emergencies whenever we faced financial difficulties. They had come to our aid, so today I believe they should help us resolve this matter as well. The room fell silent as the slideshow continued to play on the projector. Jill's mother raised her voice, demanding, "What do you want?" I responded with equal intensity, saying, "Tell your daughter to confess everything here in front of everyone." Throughout this, Jill had been crying, her face hidden in her hands. She was reluctant to speak. After persistent urging and my frustration with her family, she finally looked at me and admitted, "You've made an entire movie about me." I told her that I wanted to hear everything else, when it started, why she felt the need for an affair partner, and what her plans for the future were. Her parents and uncle decided to leave, expressing their desire not to be a part of this chaotic situation. I hoped they would refrain from interfering in my affairs in the future. Meanwhile, her siblings and friends remained to support her despite numerous emotional breakdowns. She eventually confessed everything, as I had suspected. It had all begun when we faced financial difficulties. She claimed she never intended to cheat on me, but during that period, I was emotionally distant, and she felt lonely. It's ironic to think that during that time, it was me who needed support the most, as I was managing numerous responsibilities. Instead of being there for me, she turned to someone else. According to her, their relationship had started as a friendship and nothing more, and she found solace in him. He felt lonely too. His wife works long hours just like you do. "We found common ground in our loneliness," she said. I apologized for not realizing how our emotional connection turned physical, and we began to enjoy each other's company on a physical level, she continued. She said things like, "I'm truly sorry, I'm a terrible person, please don't let our children see this, they'll hate me, and I'll feel like an awful mom," and so on. Her friends and siblings tried to comfort her, but why? Because she was crying and pleading, and it seemed like no one was trying to understand my pain. I ended up looking like the bad guy because I exposed my wife in front of everyone. She gave me a look and asked, "What did you hope to achieve by airing this in public? We could have resolved this privately." I knew many people would question my actions, wondering why I chose to make this public. I believe I've already explained my reasons sufficiently, and I won't defend myself any further. I've been through so much. I've dedicated more than half of my life to working hard with my family, and this is what I get in return. Now, I no longer care about anyone else except myself and my own well-being. Update: following our confrontation, I served her with divorce papers. I had them prepared in advance while I was gathering evidence. She pleaded with me, saying that divorce wasn't the answer and that it would only harm our children. She even offered to end things with the other man immediately and promised to be a good wife and mother, just as she had been all these years. She felt she deserved a second chance for everything she had done for me and the kids. I told her that introducing another man into our marriage had already disrupted our children's lives, and divorce wouldn't bring any more damage. She asked how we should explain it to them, and I explained that our kids were nearly adults and could understand the situation. I didn't want to hide the divorce from them, but I suggested we reveal the reason in an age-appropriate manner. I also informed her that I would be moving out, and she could stay in the house for the remainder of the lease. I didn't want to continue living in a house surrounded by her family and friends. I told her that the children could decide whom they wanted to live with. Eventually, everyone left, and I couldn't bear the idea of sharing a roof alone with her, so I also left and spent the night at my warehouse. The next morning, I returned home, and the children were already there. Jilly and I sat them down and broke the news about our separation. Surprisingly, they handled it with more maturity than we expected. Children have a keen sense of when their home is broken. I informed them that I would be moving out while their mother would remain in the house until the lease expired or until she figured out her next step. When we told them they could choose which one of us they wanted to live with, they asked which one of us was planning to bring a new boyfriend or girlfriend into the picture. Their question caught me off guard, and I looked at Jilly, explaining that neither of us had plans to remarry anytime soon. They said they needed some time to think, and we respected their decision. In the meantime, I started packing my belongings and loading them onto my truck. I had already found a place for myself, but I was still waiting for possession, which was due in 2 weeks. So, I decided to stay at my warehouse until then. As I was leaving, I reassured my children that they didn't need to rush their decision and could let me know whenever they wanted to move in with me. Jill approached me and asked, "So, is this the end? Are you never going to forgive me?" I replied, "Not anytime soon," and walked away. After setting up a temporary room for myself in the warehouse, I decided to reach out to the fair partner's wife. I felt it was only right to share the truth with her, considering the betrayal she had experienced. I found her email address on a professional social network and sent her a detailed email introducing myself and providing my contact information. Surprisingly, she called me back within 10 minutes. During our conversation, she struggled to find words to express her feelings. I assured her that I understood her pain because I'd been through a similar situation. She broke down and shared that she had been working tirelessly for her family's well-being. Her husband, the fair partner, had once been an aspiring baseball player in his 20s, but an accident left him unable to play. Now, she was the sole breadwinner, working hard to secure their children's future. It was disheartening to hear how he had repaid her love and sacrifices. I shared my personal experience with her, including the fact that I had served divorce papers to Jilly. She requested time to contemplate it and expressed gratitude before concluding our conversation. A week prior to the designated day, Jill's father reached out to apologize. He conveyed remorse for the hardships I endured due to Jill. Frankly, his apology held little significance for me by then, as I had already endured more than my fair share. Tomorrow, I'll be relocating to my new residence, which is situated far away from my previous one. My aim is to minimize any potential encounters with Jill, her family, or acquaintances. While I acknowledge that occasional interaction may be inevitable due to our children, that's the extent of it. At present, all I yearn for is tranquility. I intend to take a hiatus from all social media platforms for the time being.